Winter had finally settled over Whispering Pines like a heavy, suffocating shroud of white velvet. Inside the Ari sound studio, the air was a thick, intoxicating mixture of burning cedar smoke and the cold, metallic scent of ancient recording equipment. Kael stood by the frost-etched window, watching the snowflakes fall in a terrifying, total silence that seemed to press against the glass. In this world of echoes, he was learning that even a snowflake had a sound, a soft, crystalline sigh as it surrendered to the earth. Behind him, the rhythmic, steady thump-thump of Seraphina, cleaning a vintage leather saddle, filled the barn, sounding like a slow, tired heartbeat. They hadn't spoken a single word to one another since the night of the glass ornament, yet the air between them vibrated with a frequency so high it felt like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. Master Aris emerged from his glass-walled sanctuary, clutching a heavy rusted reel of film as if it were a sacred, dangerous relic. "The synchronization," he announced, his voice a dry, ominous rasp that seemed to cut through the swirling dust motes in the air. He was referring to the most technically difficult and emotionally draining scene in the studio's long secret history. A grand ballroom dance occurring during a violent mountain thunderstorm. The sound of swirling silk dresses had to perfectly match the chaotic rhythm of the falling rain and the erratic, panicked breathing of two desperate lovers. If you miss a single heartbeat, if your rhythm falters for even a microsecond, the entire illusion is shattered, Aris warned, his cold eyes lingering on Kael's steady, calloused hands. You will work as one for the footsteps, one for the atmosphere. They moved to the far back of the barn, to a section Kael had come to call the Library of Footsteps. Shelves reached all the way to the darkened ceiling, packed with hundreds of shoes from every era imaginable, delicate satin slippers, hobnailed military boots, and worn-out dancing pumps that still smelled of old floor wax. Seraphina reached up and pulled a pair of silk-covered heels from a high, dusty shelf, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of the ribbon with a heartbreaking tenderness. My mother wore these for the very last recording she ever made in this room, she whispered, her voice so low it barely registered on the sensitive equipment surrounding them. Kael watched the way her hands moved, gentle, reverent, and profoundly lonely. He realized in that moment that for Seraphina, these objects weren't just props. They were the only family she had left to talk to. The rehearsals began in the center of the deep gravel pit, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of a single work light. To capture the visceral sound of the ballroom dance, they had to move in a perfect, impossible unison. Kael held a large, thin sheet of rusted metal, shaking it with precision to mimic the low rumble of distant thunder, while Seraphina began the delicate, sharp click-clack of the dance on a cold marble slab. At first, they were clumsy, their rhythms clashing like broken, rusted gears in an old clock. Aris watched from behind the safety of his glass pane, his face a mask of bitter disappointment. "Again!" he shouted through the intercom, his voice distorted by static. "You are two separate noises. You are a distraction. I need one single pulsating soul." The pressure in the room became suffocating, the absolute silence of the studio magnifying every small mistake until it sounded like a thunderclap. To find the rhythm, they realized they had to abandon the safety of distance. Kael stepped into Seraphina's personal space, So close he could smell the faint, sharp scent of the machine oil she used for the equipment and the soft, floral ghost of her lavender perfume. He placed his hand firmly on her shoulder, not as a gesture of affection, but to feel the physical timing of her muscles as she moved. Seraphina didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into the contact, her body acting as a conductor for the beat he was creating. As they practiced the sweeping turn of the waltz together, the gravel beneath their feet shifted in a perfect, harmonious arc. For the first time, the barn didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like a secret stage where only the two of them existed, moving to a music that no one else could hear. As the night deepened and the storm outside intensified, Aris called them into the cramped recording booth for the closed mics. This was the most intimate and revealing part of Foley work, recording the non-verbal sounds of the actors, the soft sighs, the sharp gasps, and the frantic, shallow catching of breath. The booth was a tiny, soundproof wooden box, barely large enough for two people to stand without touching. The red recording light turned on, casting a deep crimson glow over their faces and turning the corners of the room into pools of bloody shadow. "Don't just mimic the breath," Aris's voice whispered in their headphones, sounding uncomfortably close. "Feel the desperation of the characters on screen. They are losing each other in the dark. Make me hear the fear of their separation." In the absolute darkness of the booth, Kael and Seraphina stood chest to chest, their heartbeats almost audible in the silence. The high-fidelity headphone allowed them to hear every microscopic sound, the dry swallow of a throat, the soft rustle of a cotton shirt, the frantic, irregular racing of a heart. As the film played on the tiny monitor, they began to breathe in perfect sync with the lovers on the screen, their lungs expanding and contracting as if they were a single organism. Their breaths became a mirror image of one another, a frantic, shared oxygen in a room that felt like it was running out of air. It wasn't acting anymore. The desperation Aris had demanded was real, born from the agonizing fact that they were this close, yet still separated by a lifetime of secrets. The synchronization was flawless because it was fueled by their own forbidden truth. During a particularly intense crescendo of the imaginary rainstorm on the screen, Kael's hand found Seraphina's in the deep shadows of the booth. It wasn't an accidental touch this time, it was an act of rebellion. Their fingers entwined, their palms pressing together with a sudden heat that defied the freezing winter howling outside the barn walls. The sensitive headphones amplified the sound of their skin sliding against skin, a soft electric friction that was louder and more powerful than any thunder they could ever create with metal sheets. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat, a genuine sharp gasp of surprise and longing. That sound would eventually be edited into the film as a masterpiece of realistic sound design, but in that moment it was a silent cry for help that only Kael could hear. In the control room, Master Aris watched the needles on his analog meters spike into the red. He was a genius of sound. He knew exactly what a human heart sounded like when it was breaking, and he knew the frantic, heavy rhythm of a heart falling into a dangerous love. He didn't stop the recording. He let the reels spin, capturing the most private, vulnerable moments of their connection like a silent thief in the night.
He saw the reflection of the red recording light in their eyes and felt a cold, calculated sense of triumph. If they wanted to play with the fire of their emotions in his studio, he would use that fire to create the greatest masterpiece of his career, even if it meant burning them both to ashes in the process of his art. When the session finally ended and the red light flickered off, the air in the studio felt suddenly thin and freezing. They stepped out of the booth, eyes averted, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them. Without a word, Seraphina slipped something small and cold into Kael's pocket as they passed each other in the darkened hallway. Later, in the absolute privacy of his small, drafty room, Kael pulled the object out. It was a small, ancient glass marble, perfectly clear, with a tiny, dried violet frozen forever in the center. It was a silent object, one that made no noise, yet carried the crushing weight of 1,000 unspoken words. It was her promise to him that even in her father's house of endless noise, she would keep a small, quiet space just for the two of them. The next morning, Kael found Iris standing alone by the massive mixing board, listening to the previous night's recording of the booth session on a continuous loop. The sound of their shared, frantic breathing filled the empty barn, haunting, beautiful, and deeply incriminating. "It's perfect, more than perfect," Iris said without looking up, his voice sounding like ice cracking under pressure. "But remember this, Kael. A sound only exists while it is being made. Once the recording is over, the silence always returns. And silence is where people like you get lost forever." It was a clear, direct threat. Aris was letting him know that he now owned the digital sound of their love, and he could delete their entire existence with a single, casual press of a button.
The chapter closes with Seraphina sitting completely alone in the high shadowed attic of the barn, looking out at the snow-covered pines through a cracked window. She holds a pair of heavy headphones to her ears, listening to nothing but the ambient white noise and static of the empty studio downstairs. In that chaotic static, she tries to find the ghost of the rhythm of Cole's footsteps from the night before. The synchronization was a technical success, but the cost was their anonymity and their safety. As the winter wind begins to howl outside, the only thing louder than the storm is the growing, terrifying silence of the uncertainty that lies ahead. Their hearts are now captured on tape, and Master Aris is the only one holding the scissors. The red light is off, but the recording remains. Aris has captured the sound of their hearts, and now the silence of Whispering Pines feels heavier than ever. Thank you for listening to the Synchronization. Their journey is far from over, and the Master's scissors are waiting. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next echo. Good night, and remember, the studio is always listening.